Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. We are beginning our journey into Aristotle's Poetics. I debated which work of Aristotle to choose. What we're doing is that we've been studying Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John in parallel. And the fourth track, I want to add some of the classic Western philosophy works. We started out with Seneca's Moral Letters. The next one I wanted to bring in was Aristotle. I debated between three works: Poetics, De Anima, and Nicomachean Ethics. I've chosen Poetics because it seems to integrate a lot with many other things that we're doing on literature, poetry, language, etc. And I personally am, very, very interested in it. It's been a long time since I've read it, so this is going to be a discovery for me as well. So let's get started. So I want to start slowly using some of the concepts of Aristotle himself. Simply the ideas of beginning, middle, and end. Okay. So this is about art. Okay. Aristotle is just one of the people writing it. It is true that he has a unique position in this. He pretty much founded this field. There was stuff before him, like Plato had said a few things, but the way in which Aristotle approaches a field, he just tries to take everything in that field and tries to make sense of it. So he's one of the founders, or the founder, of the field of aesthetics. So really what we're talking about is what is art. What is art is what we're talking about, and what makes a piece of art good art. That's what we're talking about. Now on this, we're going to do this in a fairly inductive way. So first, I want us to consider the question of art itself. Secondly, we're going to start looking at Aristotle. So what I want to do to begin with is I want to get everybody, we'll start a conversation on art first, and then slowly go into Aristotle and go from there. Today's is going to be an introductory meetup. So the question is, what is art and what makes for good art? Now, what we want to do is we want to get several viewpoints on the table first before we can go on. So try to be brief, 2 minutes maximum. Try to answer the question, what is art and what do you think is good art? What is it that makes an art good art? Because those are the questions that Aristotle is going to deal with. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat if you would like to share your thoughts on what is art, what is its function, what does it do for human beings, and what is good art. We'll start with Evanique, followed by Allison. Evanique.
So art is an expression of one's feelings, whatever one wants to tell to the world in whatever art form that suits it. So some people write plays because they can write about life or their experiences. One may do it in the form of dance. Sometimes they use a combination of mediums to really express what they want to express about art and the art form. I think what makes good art is art that is done to express what a person wants to express. Whether, I would say my favorite art form is music. So I think it could be music to have fun. It could be music to send a message. It could be music to make you think. Um, but what really good art allows the person to do is to feel whatever feelings they're feeling and feel it in a way that they don't feel shame, or they can express it however they want. And I think good art speaks to a person's heart So I think, it's one of those things that I think it's, how can I put it? I think it's authentic. And I think it's not trying to please everybody. It's coming from the person's heart, and the people that it touches, they understand it and they feel it on a different level. So I think good art is art that allows people to express themselves. And I think art is an expression of life.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. I would love to hear from as many people as possible what they think art is, what is it that it does for human beings, and what is good art? Those three questions. And try to be brief, 2 to 3 minutes. Okay. Because I want to get as many views on the table before we go into Aristotle. Allison, Paul S., and DLJ. Allison.
I think it has to reflect the human experience, and it has to be universal, really profound experiences. As to what's good art, and this is true regardless of the art form, but one of the things that I think, I was just in Berlin and I went to a lot of galleries, and what I thought was really interesting was that some of them, I didn't feel anything or understand anything unless I went and read the whole little spiel on the wall about it. And sometimes I had to watch my video to understand. I go, oh, that's where they were going. And I thought every time I needed to go to something else to understand it, something was lacking in the art. And, I think it's important to talk about art and have discussions and learn about it, but the art should contain everything it needs within the art itself. You shouldn't have to read something about it to understand it. And if the audience has to read something else or, hear it, if you have to explain your art to somebody, then you've done something wrong. Whatever you want to say about it should be embedded in the work. And then you can talk about it afterwards and have discussions, but it really should all be there inside the work, regardless of what form it's in.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Let's go next with Paul S., DLJ, and Joe. Paul.
Yeah. Wow. What a way to start, Shrikant. I mean, come on. That's such a huge universal question. Makes it exciting already. But I want to say what art is to me, because that's all I can really do, which is, and I hadn't really tried to answer this before, so thanks for asking it recently anyway, but I think it's, to me, in my current incarnation, it's like, it's the best art expresses something through that's accessible through one of the five senses or multiple five senses that can't be expressed directly through those senses. So things that really are impossible to just say, feel, touch, think, it allows you to get there. And that's kind of awkward, but that's the best I can do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next up is going to be DLJ. DLJ.
I think I want to offer three contradictory answers because it hinges on the question is what is good and who is good for. So one is it resonates. And I mean that in the sort of musical sense or comfort sense. The second one is it's an act of rebellion, which is kind of the opposite. And the third one is it sells well.
Thank you. Thank you, DLJ. Next up is Joe.
I mean, art to me is it communicates something that's an idea, a very deep idea, and it moves you emotionally, and it in a way that maybe no other way that idea may have been communicated before has moved you. I think that it's an emotional experience at that point that propels you into some type of action almost. And it gives you a new perspective on the world. And, you know, I could think of examples like Guernica or something like that, you know, and, you know, things that, looking at things in a different light, and then all of a sudden, yeah, changing your perspective on the world. At the same time, there's a beauty to it that resonates with you, and obviously a lot of other people probably, and many times. So that's what I think it is. It's culture.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Mona. Folks, if you would like, if you have not spoken before, if you would like to put your thoughts about what is art, what function does it serve for human beings, and what is good art? If you'd like to offer your answers, please go ahead and do so. Mona, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I have a feeling that what I'm going to say has already been said, but I'm just going to put it in a different word. For me, good art is transcendence. It elicits feelings of awe and wonder and makes you contemplate things that you wouldn't otherwise have had access to within yourself and within a relation with the artist. But mostly, to me, good art is an experience that makes me look deeper into myself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mona. Next up is going to be Jang, followed by Paul. Jang.
Hi. Yeah, so I think the art function is to help people connect with their emotion and the humanity. I think it's that's why I think it's so important for people to learn art when they're younger, or to integrate in the education into college. Because I have a lot of clients, mostly are IT people, and I realize a lot of them are not developed emotionally. And we have learned, you know, the art and science are so divided in college, and a lot of people didn't have the chance to learn that. That's kind of frustrating for architect, because they don't appreciate good design. They're like, all I want is this square footage and this function. It's like no emotional connection. And I think it's so important to have a healthy world. Today we have so many problems, AI, because people are so controlled with technology, but not connect to their emotion. And people have the emotion. The artists are so powerless because they have no money. In a capitalist society, money is power. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like we are living in this unbalanced world, very bad for human nature or humanity.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeng. Next up is going to be Paul, followed by Joe. Paul.
You know, whenever I'm at an art gallery, I just don't have to speak to anyone. It's just me alone. There is no music. I don't have to speak to anybody. I just see, and, you know, it's quiet, and I can really just relax. So this is the very first thing that comes to mind. But art itself also lets me see things I've never seen before. So it really inspires me. Also a writer, so I see a lot of inspiration in all the sculptures and you know, oil on canvas. But at the same time, it also lets me see, you know, history, philosophy, and you know, especially if it's ancient Rome and ancient Greece. So it always reminds me, oh, okay, I know this person, because the sculpture always reminds me of someone. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to rattle off what everybody said as best as I can. I'm not trying to summarize it. It's impossible. I'm just going to give like impressions and talk a little bit more about it. And then if you want to do one more round of comments, keep focused on just 3 questions. What is art? What function does it serve in us human beings? And third, what is good art? Okay. We talked about, I'm not going to identify people individually. I'm just going to talk about the themes. talked about art as being expression of emotions, externalization of emotions, letting you feel the emotions, connect with emotions. We talked about art as good art as being authentic, having a certain unity to it. Art as allowing you to reflect on yourself, about the world, about many things. It encourages reflection. It is about universals. Good art is self-contained. It has to speak for itself. It should actually hit you. It should actually cause impact on you. It shouldn't need a separate translator for it to have that effect on you. It's something that resonates. It's a manifestation of something that otherwise you cannot find naturally in you. It is kind of bringing together of many things. It communicates to you. It moves you. It gives you new perspectives that you did not have before. It is a thing of beauty. You have a sense of awe, a sense of transcendence, a sense of contemplation. You getting lost in the art. It allows you to look at yourself. It is like a mirror. It allows you, it gives you peace. It allows you to see new things. It inspires you. These are some of the things that were put on the table. If anybody wants to now add something or comment in more detail on any of these, so let's start with, so there are 3 questions, okay? So let's look at the 3 questions. What is art? Let's keep that aside for now, okay? What does art do for you? I think that is an important question. And what is good art? Let's start with the question of what does art do for you? Okay, just that. You're welcome to repeat. Don't worry about saying the same thing that somebody else has said, because this is a very deep topic. And you, because you're a different person, will add a different angle to what is being said. And that is very valuable, okay, to all of us, because we are all trying to explore. In this case, we're just focusing on what does art do for you? What is the function of art? Why do human beings have art at all? What function does it serve? So it's going to be Eleanor, DLJ, and Paul S. Eleanor, go ahead.
I think Joe was before me somehow.
He asked to skip. Please go on.
So art for me personally is a way of expression. It's a language. It can be expressed in with different mediums, such as verbal or visual, or even kinesthetic. Art can be personal and also universal. And I think all art is inclusive, but not all art is universal. It's either personal or universal, for me personally. Good art has certain quality to it, because it takes quite a long time to develop, to get there. It has strong expression and strong statements, of course. Not all art speaks to everyone. It's a statement of maybe time, but good art is also timeless. But it comes from a certain period of time and from a certain emotion during this period. Yeah, for now I'm done. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And folks, you can keep coming back and commenting on it.
I'm going to add one thing.
Go ahead.
I do think art uses different tools, or people use different tools to create art. And the new tool is AI. And it can be used in a very creative way to create art too.
Thank you. Thank you, Eleanor. So I'm going to narrow down the question to make it more personal. What does art do for you? We're talking about what does art do for human beings? But really, let's start with actually connecting with ourselves, of saying, what does art do for you? If you want to talk about the general question, you're welcome to do that. So you have like these two-part questions. What does art do for you? What does art do for human beings? DLJ, Paul, Joe, Evanique, and Katie. DLJ.
Yeah, so again, I'm going to give you two contradictory things. One is, I mentioned it resonates. So that's the harmony or serenity or peace side of things, right? So I'm thinking of Monet, or I'm thinking of Caspar David Friedrich, kind of the ability to draw mist, just blows my mind. So that's the serenity side of things, right? And the contradictory side of that is when I said it's an act of rebellion, it disturbs. I'm thinking of a Mike Leigh movie or something where it takes me away from my comfort zone, and I get something that something dystopic, something that some realization about myself or about the world that I hadn't seen before, and which can be disturbing and unsettling. So I think that also counts as art. It doesn't have to be all about harmony.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, DLJ. Next up is going to be Paul, followed by Joe. Paul.
The others' comments help me zero in on what I was trying to say, which is, for me, it transcends, the best art for me transcends the limitations of the medium that the art is expressed in. And there's that expression, the map is not the territory. Well, with good art, you're in the territory. You're beyond the map. You're in sort of a mystical sense. You've transcended the limitations of just a word or a sound so that's the best I can do. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next up is going to be Joe, Evany, Katie, Jeng, and Allison. Joe.
So for me personally, it provides like a place of solace. And so that ultimately it's good for my own personal well-being, in the sense that I'm looking at it and I'm able to retreat. And it's almost, I would say, a religious experience in a certain way. I think it also, if it allows you to step outside of yourself and to see things bigger than yourself. And so it expands your consciousness. And it can change the way you live your life, literally, your philosophy. There are certain pieces of art that actually can, or structures, types, it depends on types of music, that literally can open your minds up to things. Specifically, I think more so architecture, can be, when you think about the careful craftsmanship that went into certain structures, and you stand in awe, and it can change and it can inspire you to do something with arte, with excellence, I should say. When a building is done with excellence, or a structure is done with excellence, that's what I mean by the idea it can change your philosophy and your perspective to do whatever you do well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Evanique, followed by Katie. Evanique.
What art does for me is it speaks to my soul. It speaks to that place where words can't express or that maybe I can't express. But whether it's a painting, whether it's poetry, whether it's music, it speaks to me in a way that I think it doesn't speak to anybody else, because it's speaking to my soul, and it's a message that I could hear at the moment. Like I could hear a piece of music and it could put me at peace, and then I could hear that same piece of music and be in a different space in my life, and bringing that experience to it may bring me to tears. And it that same piece of music may bring back nostalgia of a time that's gone. So I think it for me, it just speaks to a place where I can't get to normally, and I just have, and the beauty of the art is that you just have to let it be, and you have to let it speak to you, and you have to, in order for art to really speak, if it's meant to speak to you, because I do think it's a spiritual thing, you just have to be. You can't control it. You can't say how it's supposed to be, or what to do. You just kind of have to let it wash over you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Folks, these are such amazing comments. So thank you. Thank you so much. This is a great way of, beginning this process. Next up is going to be Katie, followed by Cheng. Katie.
I think, well, I think I usually use it to feel beauty, but it can be really to evoke any type of feeling, to make you feel sad or to make you think. So it's kind of trying to inspire your emotions. And then I think, like, if you look at something like an Islamic building often won't use images. It's trying to like evoke majesty, whereas these grand sculpture or grand paintings on the wall of the Sistine Chapel are trying to evoke majesty. So you can use kind of, sometimes like the thing is, the referent is not the thing itself. It's like referring to something different. So I find that very interesting, trying to find the referent.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Next up is Jeng, Allison, and Mona. Jeng, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the function art to me is self-expression. And we all know, we learn that from Landmark, the highest for human is self-expression. And I think art is most individual, and also when you reach certain level, it's also most universal. That's why not anybody's art can actually resonate with all the people. But when you actually reach the human core, those master, then they can reach so many people. So before we reach that level, I think it's really helped us to connect to ourselves and the universe somehow. So when I'm doing, it's so much fun. It's just like have so much energy. It just bring this energy direct from universe to you. So I think it's such a great way to relax. So I'm very glad my kids love it. It's such a great way to de-stress and relax. So I think it's so important, even you don't have to be an artist.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeng. And there is one angle that you've added, which I want to emphasize on, because we've been talking about the function of art as a spectator of art, of somebody who's a consumer of art. But there is another perspective, and that is that of creation of art. So that's the question I'm going to ask next. But first, we'll go to Allison and Mona. What does art do for you, Allison?
It's funny that you're transitioning into the next question, because I experience it both ways.
Please, you can go ahead and talk about both. You can get started. Go ahead.
I mean, I feel, like it's a very spiritual thing. And I feel like in some ways it feels at times almost like an out-of-body experience. And what I really love about art is I feel like it's this place where I see that I'm not alone, that whatever I'm feeling, and when I see it reflected in music and dance and art, it's like, oh, someone else has felt this too, because they've created this thing that completely reflects my emotions. And so, it's soothing, but it's also really emotionally jarring at the same time. And the artists and musicians that I like the most are the ones that make me feel. I don't really like the ones that are just sort of like, you know, tepid, like elevator music, you know. And as someone that, you know, creates art, you know, it's interesting because I had a knee injury this spring, and I just went back to ballet this week. And I just was counting. This is my 8th injury. I've been dancing for 46 years. This is my 8th injury. And my son sat me down and said, "Mom, I think you're coming to the end." And I was like, no. The doctor said I can keep going into my 90s, so I'm going to keep at it. And it was interesting because, you know, and he's an artist and I'm a dancer, and he goes, "Mom, you don't do this because for money. You don't do this because anybody made you. You're not doing this for your health." He goes, "You do this because you need to." And it was so funny because I didn't think anybody noticed that, but it's the truth. I just need to. And I can't even explain why. I really can't. I've always felt like my life would be a whole lot easier if I just came home from work and sat on the couch and watched TV, but I need it. I just need, and I have since I was 8 years old. So I guess that's just how it
Thank
goes.
you. Thank you, Allison. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mona, followed by Joe, and then we will go to the topic of expression of, you know, creation of art. Go ahead, Mona.
Yes, Shrikant, I find it very interesting that you just kind of took the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say the same thing, that we focused on like art as just kind of consumer, but how about the creator of art? And I wanted to talk about that because the way I experience it with whatever I do, like whatever kind of art that I attempt, it's never to me about whether it's good art or bad art. It's about like being in that state of mind that makes art inevitable, so to speak. Like that's what I'm after, really. It's like a meditative experience, it's a transcendent experience, it's just an experience of myself, and then whatever comes of it comes of it, but it's never the point to me, at least. Right.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
So in a way, I was kind of getting to that where I said, you know, it's that you see a structure or something that has been done so well with so much care that then inspires you to do whatever you're doing well. And that's what good art is to me. So that the inspiration that you take away from it, and it transcends your own personal, like what you experience. So that's yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to summarize what people have, again, not summarize. I'm just going to run through some of the impressions that I got while everybody was speaking. And then I'm going to ask you the question to now focus on creation of art. You know, what does creation of art do for you? There is one thing about consuming art that is produced by somebody else, and that is profound. That is very important. What is the value of creation of art? So let's look at this. You know, we talked about it being a deeply personal experience, a spiritual experience, a religious experience, something that speaks to your soul. There is a sense of timelessness in great art. There's a sense of harmony, serenity. At the same time, sometimes great art disturbs. It makes you feel things and point out things that you have never seen before, initially producing a negative reaction. Great art takes you beyond the object itself and makes you think of something else. You know, it's a map that lets you see the territory through it. It gives you solace, gives you peace. It allows you to step outside of yourself. It allows you to transform yourself, make fundamental change. It inspires you. It provides a model of what you can be. It holds up an ideal. In order to fully let the art work on you, you kind of have to surrender to it and let it speak to you and let it flow over you. Art has grandeur, majesty. You're always looking for the referent. It's like a pointer, it is pointing to something. And what it is pointing to is the point of the art. It is self-expression. It makes you feel that you're not alone, that somebody else produced something that speaks to something deeply personal in you. You do it because you need to do it. When for artists who actually produce art, it is soothing and jarring at the same time. In different ways, art can be soothing and jarring at the same time. So now I want to ask the question, whoever wants to answer it is welcome to do that. And it's about production of art. Now, most people, whenever they think about the art, they always think of consumption. But I think production of art is far deeper topic, and it has the potential of doing all this and more, and in a far more intense and far more transformative way. And most artists will tell you that actually it only seems that they are transforming their art, but the art is transforming them as in a very real way, as they are transforming things. So would love to hear your comments. If you have experience, you don't have to speak. If you have experience producing art, I would be honored and I'm very grateful if you'd share with us, what does producing of art do for you? Let's start with DLJ, Paul, Sabrina, and Ebonique. DLJ.
I thought I'd get in quick with the Aristotle world that probably everybody else is going to mention. So I wouldn't classify myself as an artist. I'm aphantasiac, which means I don't have a mind's eye. So back in art class, in my pre-teens or whenever, the teacher would say, draw something from your imagination. I would think, no, nothing there. That's what aphantasia is. I don't have mental images. I can draw, so what's in front of me, I can draw, and it usually looks like what it's supposed to be. I've danced on stage, I've sung on stage, but pretty much as an amateur. I'm a useless photographer. One thing I think I can maybe call myself an artist in only insofar as other people have thought it good enough to publish, is that I write poetry. And for me, here's the word, cathartic. So it's a cathartic experience. It gets out the emotion or whatever I'm feeling onto the page, and then I polish it to the point where I've depersonalized it, and then it's ready for other people to read. And I have to confess, it does give me a little bit of pleasure when somebody reads one of my poems and starts to cry. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but if it's something that, for example, I wrote a poem for a lady in Australia whose father had recently died, and the words that she said, I turned it into a poem, gave it back to her, and she wept for about 40 minutes. And I thought, okay, that must be a good poem then. That's terrible. It's Schadenfreude, I think, isn't it? But yeah, anyway. So catharsis, basically.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, DLJ. And folks, you're welcome to share whatever experience you have in producing art, because like production of art is important, whether it is, singing in the bathroom, or it doesn't matter what. What does such a thing do for you? You are producing art. What does that do for you? Next up is going to be Paul S., Sabrina, Evanique, Joe, and Jen. Paul.
Yeah, I think it was interesting how DLG, you commented on your talent as judged by the world. And we all can consider whether that's even important or not as a creator. I'm not sure, because you can create things that the world might not judge as important, but they're still very important creations. So I'll using myself, I'm not a world-class musician, but I find it hugely cathartic to create music. And I could use writing, but I'd rather focus on music because I'm not really that great at music, but there's a lot of better people than me. But when I create a composition, especially, that feels like I actually didn't create it, but it came through me, and I sort of gave birth to it, but it wasn't really mine. Maybe that's what the closest a man can come to giving birth. That's how the experience is most transformative for me. Whether the rest of the world will listen to my song, well, as Mona said, maybe not. But it was a cathartic experience to channel it through myself and then you practice just to become a better channel. And it's so satisfying because the more you get skills in your fingers and your mind musically and study, the more smoothly it all flows without thought. So that's what it's about for me.
Wonderful. That was beautiful, Paul. I'll say that, man is a being of self-made soul. We make ourselves. And art is about that. You're actually not sculpting, you're sculpting the outside, but you're sculpting the outside in order to sculpt the inside. And what other people see is the result of that. They may or may not appreciate it. It may not speak to them, but you're always doing it. If you're doing it authentically, you're doing it to express the deepest part of you so that you can see it, you can work on it and feed it back to you to build on it. Thank you, Paul. Next up is Sabrina, followed by Evanique. Sabrina.
Hello. So I pretty much look at most of the things I do through the eyes of art, because everything for me has to have art show up in some way. And so even if I'm cooking, like when I present the food, it has to look like pleasing to the eye, not just that it tastes good. But I do photography, painting, interior design, poetry, murals. So everything goes through that filter for me. And I like it to be not just, like for the paintings, for example, an expression of emotions, but also an expression of humanity in some way where I'm capturing how we are and who we are, right? From the best to the worst, or just to make us think of something, and meditate upon that particular thing that I'm trying to express to there. So like the painting that I'm working on now is sort of a version of a sunflower, but it's dead, right? And it's drooping and it's full of leaves that are dry, but can also be still appreciated regardless of what is right now. That there's still beauty in that. Should we choose to look at it and seek it, right? So that not everything needs to be looked through that lens that it has to look just pretty, but what else is there in the essence, right? It was part of nature, it's part of God. So to me, that's very important. And with the poetry, it's not just to express myself, but lately it's been more of expressing emotions of those that don't dare speak, particularly, you know, the males, right? That many times that gets shoved down. So I felt, okay, what would that look like, right? What would that taste like? And what would that feel like on paper? So yeah, so that's been like my challenge lately. So
Wonderful.
I think it's everything in humans, right? That sometimes needs a channel and it just doesn't show up in other ways.
Thank you, Sabrina. Great comments. I want to just point out two things. One is that when you look at the Greeks and look at ancient times in India, even in China, art is a much larger concept than what is held today. Today, when you think of art, you always automatically think of fine arts, of some specific kinds of things. Whereas art was a much larger concept, and it involved everything that you did. Whether it was in accordance, it captured the deepest things, and it's not just emotions, the surface emotions, but you're trying to capture something deep of humanity itself. You're being human itself, and interaction between human beings. Something very deep, universal about us is being captured through art. Thank you. Next up is going to be Evanik, followed by Joe. Evanik.
Yeah, so about when I've created art. So I think it started for me in high school when I was in the senior play and we did Pippin. And it was one of those things where you could be another character and yet that could be the expression of yourself. And what it means is that, like, when we were taught how to, become a part of the character, the thing is you had to create a background for the character, like, where did this person come from? What did this person do before the lines start? Like, you had to create a background, a history that was partially based in the play, but part of it you just had to fill in. But what was happening is that you were filling in parts that came from your own thoughts and your own experiences. So you could express that. So I think acting was the first foray into creating art because you had to create that character for yourself. And you'll notice the best actors, and especially in Broadway, I think this is true, is that the best Broadway actors and actresses could take the same play that has been done many times by many different actors and actresses on Broadway, yet they can bring themselves to it and transform it. And I think that's what I learned by creating. When I was in college, I learned how to create sets and create backgrounds. And when at Cabrini, we had these things called environmental plays. And what it is that we took, instead of just a stage, we took a whole bottom half of a building and we transformed it into the play. We did Our Town, we did Cabaret when I was there. And we turned it into, when it was Cabaret, we turned it into the scenes from Cabaret, and it was like a full immersive experience. And what our theater director taught us to do was, again, what do you think this looked like back in the day? Like, he would not, it, first of all, Neil Newman was like he was one of those people that had a different take on things. Let's just put it like that. And he told us, like, bring your experience to it. And The funny thing about cabaret is, and it's during Nazi Germany, right? It's the beginning. And I was like, well, how in the heck am I going to bring myself into this? And he was like, if you were Black in Germany, wouldn't you be scared? He was like, no, he didn't say it like that, but I think I interpreted it. But he was like, how would you feel if you were Black in Germany back in the time of Hitler? And I was like, I would be scared out of my mind. And he was like, yeah, the first part is very festive. The second part is very doom and gloom. And he was like, you have to bring this to the set. And we did. And it was one of those things where it transformed. And, the thing is, it was like Cabrini was community theater. It wasn't just college students. We brought people in the community into the play, and people from the community came and saw the play, and they were like, you guys really transformed it. I don't know how you did it, but you did. And so you have to bring a part of yourself and that expression of yourself to everything that you do, to the art form. So I learned it through acting, and I learned it through set design, and I also learned it through directing. I was an assistant director on Artel, and I had to get people to express themselves. And the only way I could do that is if I did it. And then it was also with taking drama classes in college, and that every character you played, like Neil was really adamant that you created a storyline, like I forget what it's called now, but you had to create a storyline behind it, and then you had to, in order to do it effectively, you had to bring yourself to it. And so, creating art is how, to me, I think an artist expresses themselves, and what do they bring to it. And if you're being, and that's why I like the authenticity of it, that you're bringing your authenticity to the character, to the sets, to any art form that you are doing. In order to do it well, you have to bring yourself into it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. So I just want to comment on one thing. This interaction between taking in a context, actually reading all the lines, knowing everything about the play so that it kind of becomes a part of you. And then actually authentically expressing yourself through that. So it is, on one hand, you have to be true to the lines. You have to be true to the context completely. You have to take that in. And in order to actually make it live, you have to do that. The other thing, like this is what I think some of the method acting schools do, is that you really need to know everything cold. Okay, you have to take all of that in. And then you have to actually interact with characters. So both two parties are actually expressing themselves in a fully human way with that as a base. And what the result of that, when you have these great actors doing that, is actually magical, because something new gets created, because it's two human beings in the present interpreting the story and the lines and the interaction between characters through their own person. So it creates something new using the play as a base. So just wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Next up is Joe, followed by Jen. Joe.
So I like to draw. That's what it, and when I'm not drawing, I know that it's, that I'm working through something difficult. So, but it's usually, I'll draw two types of things that I don't know if the second one's going to be considered art, but I would just draw what's going on in my life at that particular moment in time. And everything in it would have some type of meaning. And then I can put a story to that. And that's helps me kind of just reflect very deeply on what's going on. And I've done that mostly a lot during changes in my life, big changes. And so, I put, images down on paper that that you know, and that allows me to reflect a little bit more deeply about what I'm going through. I also draw models and ideas, and I guess that's a form of art, but it helps me in a way to put a story to it. And if the model doesn't really look right, well, then maybe I need to fill it in. Something I need to fill in. So that's part of the transformative part of it, is that it brings something into the consciousness that you didn't otherwise have. So when you look at art, somebody's created art, you may be inspired by something, but if you're creating it, there may be a gap in what you've created that you then see that wouldn't have been able to see before. And then if you're able to put a story to it, a story is actually, is usually logical, right? And so that there's some logic to what the story, and it allows you actually to even sometimes understand a theory of something. And that's what I mean. It could be even a theory of the world, of how to live your life. And so that's what really art is, where the transformative fills in the gaps, maybe that wasn't in our consciousness. Whether it's externally being influenced, or if I sit down and I'm drawing it and there's something missing, then you have to be able to put words to that. What is it? Why is it there? And then when you think about it in those terms, every part of the drawing has a meaning. So that's and you're able to articulate that very clearly. So yeah, and when I'm not in a good place, sometimes I don't draw. That's the place I retreat from that. Anyway, that's how I relate with art.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I want to focus on two things. Now, again, the concept of art most people have is a very narrow concept. They think of art as mostly entertainment, as a side thing. No, historically, that has not been the case. Art is the form in which people, human beings have grappled with the most important issues of their lives. You look at the lives of artists, and what their art does is that it captures all the struggles, all the big questions in a concrete way. So it goes, it goes to life itself, not just, titillation of emotions. It goes right through to the core at its best. The second part of it is the loop. Bronowski talks about this loop between the eye, the brain, and the hand. There is this loop going on. And actually, mind works well only if you have that loop going. So you are actually seeing things, figuring things out, and actually making them. And then you're seeing things and doing that. So you will see the gaps and you will transform them, and you are actually transforming not only what you're working on outside, but what is going on inside at the same time. Leonardo used to say that if you want to, he had this entire section of his notebooks on how to see. And his essential advice is that if you want to see, draw. Because, our brain is very large, and our capacity to notice things is limited when things are in focus. When you have this loop going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, you can really notice what is out there. You can learn to see using your hands and your drawing. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Jen, followed by Allison. Jen. Jen, are you there?
Challenge to find the button. Yeah, so I think to me, the creating of art, the reason I chose architecture because I like drawing so much. When I was young, I draw all over my desktop, books, everything. And then I was thinking, I'm good with physics. Architecture is the things I need to do. So I just applied for architecture school. Unfortunately, since I study architecture, draw become part of the work. I don't enjoy it anymore. So only when I took that drawing, like figure drawing class with my son because he's interested. So I registered with him. I was like, so much fun. My God, I just like why I didn't do it earlier. I think just like the art is kind of luxury in a way because we're just consumed with all these practical things we have to do day by day. We just don't have that luxury mind. And I think that the function of art is like meditation, because when you draw, like you mentioned, it's not just you use your brain, you use your mind, you use your hand. Just like ski, your whole body, everything is in one with whatever you draw, like nature or whatever. So then when you merge yourself with that, it's very transformative. Another thing is, I think it's self-discovery. We all see things differently. It's reflect what we pay attention to. People enjoy the same thing, have very different results. So it really helps us to understand ourselves through what we draw. And I think higher level, maybe it's reach our spiritual level, which I'm still waiting to discover.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. And I think as a artist, the other thing is that, it's like, even when as a child you drew something or you did something, you felt a joy of it and you kind of lost it, you can always pick it back up. And if you're still alive and if you can still interact with the world, then you can discover and rediscover that. And now with a much greater knowledge of yourself, much greater appreciation of what it is doing for you, you will notice it far more. And you will notice the value of it far more. So it's a beautiful example of you going with your son to learn. Next up is going to be Allison, followed by Eleanor. Allison.
So I've done really, like in dance, there's two kinds of art. There's interpretive art where you're doing someone else's choreography, and then when you're choreographing. And for years and years and years, I really fought against choreographing. I just didn't want to do it. What I liked was interpreting the choreography. I liked the thing is, you don't just do the steps, you play with the steps and the way that you use your phrasing. And it's kind of like if you're cooking, I mean, like there's a hunk of meat there, but what spices are you going to bring to it? And the seasoning, and that's everything really. But eventually I finally started to choreograph, and the first time anything that I choreographed went on stage, somebody in the audience cried. They came up to me bawling, and I was like, oh my God, I guess I got to keep going. I'm better at this than I thought. But I think what I initially didn't like about it was that when I was dancing somebody else's dances, I wasn't as exposed. And when I choreographed something, it was me, and it was my emotions and my thoughts and feelings. So that it felt, like you're very vulnerable and you feel like everyone's looking right at you. And so that was hard. But one of the things that I found that I really liked about it the most was that, like in literature, there's sort of a pattern of how you're, there's an introduction, there's building of conflict, rising action, there's a climax, and there's resolution, and dance does the same thing. And what became so much fun was to figure out how to create this sort of tension using dancers. And sometimes you would create it by adding more dancers in, and sometimes by the movements that they were doing. And and what was always great was like feeling that connection with the audience when you knew that you'd affected them. And there was one time I did something where I had it was like this music with this rainforest, and so I had this long piece of blue fabric, and so the dancers would kneel down and they would just kind of like shake the fabric on the ground, and it was just building it and building and building, and then all of a sudden they lifted it up so it was like in this giant arc, and the audience just went like, they gasped, and I was like, yes, I nailed it, you know. And so I don't know, it's so much fun to create. It really is. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alison, for sharing that. I want to focus on 2 points. One point is that of vulnerability. You know, I think that is fundamental to art. What you're saying is that, look, what is inside me is so important that I want to work on it. And I want to work on it externally, to use this external thing to feed it back. By its nature, you are exposing yourself. You're exposing the deepest parts of you. And therein lies its primary value. If you're going to give something which is just a superficial thing and say, hey, here, that's not going to do much for you or to anybody else. So in that sense, producing of art is an act of courage. It is an act of saying that my life is important, and I will pursue it. The second point is about the plot. That it's the plot that is holding everything together. It is the one that is going to have the right beginning and the right end, and everything. It's the curve, you know, it's like Beethoven's symphony, where it starts off promising something and then it goes and does this huge arc and lands, producing this amazing effect. And that is the choreography, that is the plot. In various art forms, they're all different, but that idea of plot producing this effect where they take people from whatever beginning that they are and move them to a different place through this irresistible movement, which at once is surprising at times, to keep the interest and give shocks. At the same time, there is a logical progression. You know, how do you make that happen? That is what, you know, the plot is about. That's one thing that Aristotle focuses on quite a bit. All right, next up is going to be Eleanor, Julie, and Mona. Eleanor.
I'm a little bit different with art. I love to work on art projects with people together, especially on paid projects, and they must be paid. I choose to be part of a bigger thing. And for me, it's important to listen and be liquid and quiet and smooth when I work with people. I don't want to disturb them. And I take a technical part in my artworks. I'm more of a technician, but I do find peace to do things the same. It's only can be done one time in this art, in this way. So I still feel refilled. And I think in a current time, cooperation is important if you want to achieve great things. And I love to share and create for people and take myself back. And it's actually, this is the most artist point of it. Take yourself back and listen to the team in order to be the pencil and operate the technical part. This is difficult. It's not easy. And I think if I studied it, I am obligated to service people. Because I see my my photography studies. I didn't study, went to school for years to just do me. I want to be useful with what I studied, what I learned, with the skills, and give it to people. I like to share. I like to share my knowledge. I don't want hoarding it. And I like to show it to people. And I think what we see today on TV, and I'm coming from visual side, it's all done in big teams together. There is no one person. And as I was in Florence, I think Michelangelo and Leonardo, they were also working in big teams, especially if you see all the sculptures they did. It's impossible just in that short lifetime, if you count that he was doing over 1,000 sculptures, let's say, right? It's impossible to achieve this precision just by himself. So there were people working on it, which were probably forgotten. And probably people were dying, like pyramids. The pyramid was not built by one person. So yeah, cooperational work.
Thank you. Thank you, Lenore. A great point. And that has not been focused on yet. There is a lot of great art. I mean, consider a symphony. You have so many different players. There is the music, there is the director, there is, each person has a role. Same thing with a movie production, same thing with everything. And what it requires is, I think you zoomed in on the importance of listening, importance of actually listening to the other person. This is kind of the authentic relating, where you are saying that all of us are trying to build this thing together. So there is a goal, there is an object, and each person communes with the object in their own way and adds things, and there is enough respect for each other that all of it, kind of melts. There are people who are able to kind of do the choreography better than others. There are people who are, can play an individual role, individual function in this art, which they are really, really, really good at. And but for it to produce the effect, it has to mesh with something else that somebody else is doing to produce its effect. So the art of cooperation is in itself an art form of how do you do that? How do you do that so that you are true to each person can be true to their own character, and each person can be true to the common goal without these lines, these ships running into each other, acting together like a flotilla, working with each other rather than, at cross purposes. So thank you, Lenore. Next up is Julie, followed by Mona. Julie.
It wasn't until about 20 years ago that I found out what the word muse means on a Will and Grace episode. I was like, well, what's a muse? And since then, I that word comes into my mind a lot, because muse is a catalyst to my own ability to get in a place where where I actually have access to beyond, I guess. And so I started exploring classical music while I jogged a few years ago, because on the jog, not only my thinking stops for moments of appreciation, but I see different perspectives, and then I get ideas beyond me. And so that, in that sense, the beauty of the classical music is the catalyst to my own connection with myself and my own discovery of myself. And I do write, and I put an inquiry out there, and then when I am doing the writing, I kind of discover about myself. I again connect with myself, and then I express. And I would say that this call is also a place where I go to that place, and here we are all expressing in a way. It's art and listening in a mode that's not concerned about ourselves. There's not fear there. And so it's a beautiful, powerful thing. So that's what I have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. This role of a catalyst, a muse, is a crucial thing, because what it is doing is that it is showing you, it is something that speaks to you personally. And at the same time, it is connecting you to something that is beyond you. So it has both those characteristics, that it speaks to you, and at the same time, it takes you beyond yourself. So it is, in some sense, it is yours. It's almost like your friend. And in another sense, it is something, it's like a God. So it's like a combination of God and friend together. And what it is doing is that it is actually inviting you to stretch, to go beyond where you are to something higher. So this idea of muse or catalyst is core. So thank you. Next up is going to be Mona.
Thank you, Shrikant. I really appreciated what you just said a while ago about art being used in a more broad sense, like not just in terms of, like painting, music, or like art. Anything can be art. And I was thinking about what the difference between craft and art is. Like craft when you're just doing something, but art takes you a step further. And I thought about art in other contexts, like say maybe I know a poem by Elizabeth Bishop's the art of losing isn't hard to master. And I thought about it's like anything can be art, like baking bread, or making a friend, or teaching, or just being alive can be a form of art. And then I thought, what's the difference between that and craft? And I thought about how art should be about just when you give yourself fully to it, like you are just completely giving yourself to it. And that can be a way of living. And that's an art to me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mona. All right, folks. So now we've finished the initial part. Now, what I want to do, instead of asking for the question, because we are now about 1.5 hours already into the meetup. So we've got about half an hour approximately to wrap up. And I want to wrap up in a very nice way. Okay. So I'm thinking of how to do that. So firstly, I want to point out, it's just, I'm completely blown away by all these observations about art. This is going to be very special, to be talking about this. Okay. So even without going into Aristotle's Poetics, see how rich a topic this is. Okay. Now, the way I would like to approach Aristotle's Poetics is to not forget this conversation. Think about everything everybody said. Okay. Think about it to yourself. And I strongly recommend, I am a big fan of creation of art. Because in some ways, as as Mona was pointing out, everything is art. This is art. Okay. What we are doing here is art. We have to do it right. We have to do it. And I'm trying to do it. And I think so are each one of you. And what it is producing, this is cooperative. And what it is producing is something far more than any one of us can actually do. So don't think of it as that we're studying a book, because there is really no reason to study a book. That's not the purpose. Really, the purpose is to be more artistic, or to actually express. Again, being artistic is not the right word, because unfortunately, a lot of it has been, the word has been really reduced. When people think of being artistic, they are just talking about the flares that are put on the top of things. It's decoration. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, the greatest thing that we can get out of this is to improve our own production of art. And I think Leonardo is right when he says that if you want to see, draw. If you want to enjoy art and appreciate art, produce art. Because that's the only way you can actually appreciate art. Because you will see how it is put together, what it is doing. You're taking the other side. Now, the person whose art you're consuming may be far, far higher than you, but it does not matter. It is you trying your best to capture the deepest parts of you in concrete expression is what art is about. And the consumer of that art is primarily you. So you're the producer and you're the consumer. And you will be able to learn from other people much more if you're doing it. Like, suppose a sculptor wants to learn to be a sculptor. He needs to sculpt. He can't just watch sculptures. He can't even watch a sculptor doing a sculpture. He needs to be doing that in order to learn. So then what is the purpose of going through this Aristotle's Poetics? Aristotle's Poetics is one of the first attempts to actually grapple with this phenomena of art. And his entire approach, whether he's doing Nicomachean Ethics or anything else, it's trying to put together all the observations that he can about a particular thing, in this case, art, and try to see some patterns in that. So it is going to make you think about art in a way which is very, which is very fundamental. It's going to raise questions. Don't think of books as answers. Really, it's all about getting the questions. He talks about three things. He says, each art has an object. What are you trying to do? It has a medium that you're using, and it has a manner in which you're doing it. He also talks about the plot as being the heart of art. Because plot at once says, where are you going? Which is the object. What is the general mechanism through which you're going to do that? That's the medium. And then how in detail are you going to move along that medium? That's the manner. You can think of it as beginning, middle, and end. It may seem like very simple ideas, but they are quite profound. So he has ideas like this, which are very, very simple. Okay. Now there are some things where he goes into details with the particular kinds of art that were prevalent at that time. which you do not need to really master. I don't think that's necessary. Interact with it yourself. Think of everything that you've said about art, or everything that everybody has said about art, both in terms of response to art, what it can do for you, and in terms of what a good art is, what does it take to produce it, what does it do for you when you produce it. And then put whatever you're reading side by side. Now, I have a certain way of reading. I just like it because I know that, people's minds work very differently. My mind is, I like to do multiple passes, many passes over things that I really want to understand, because it's impossible for me to get everything in the single reading. Even when I'm going through museums, my first thing is to run through the entire museum, see the entire museum. And then while doing that, identify all the spots where I really want to spend time, and then go spend time on those. So I would recommend, it's a very short work. It's extremely short. Okay. And some of it is not really necessary. Okay. And you can decide about it yourself. You might actually get a lot more from a particular chapter than I am getting. Okay. So I'm not, but I'm saying that if you, for example, find that, okay, why should I be listening to this particular kind of poetry? I don't even know what this kind of poetry is and what is he saying about it. It's not going to hurt you too much if you rush through it. Okay. But keep track of the things that you think are relevant to you, that you think are important. Try to separate them out yourself. Use this, high-tech thing. It's called pen and paper. Okay, please keep notes of what you're getting from it. Okay, then keep organizing them. Ideally, try to get it on one paper. Draw diagrams, see. So actually interact with this work as a work of art. You produce on one sheet of paper this entire Poetics. Okay, try to do that. It's going to be different for each of us. And see what the connections are of these ideas. What is he saying? Okay, it is short enough. It is full of delights. Just commune with it, and we will go through it. And what I'm hoping to do is that we will have the same kind of experience we had when we were going through Tao Te Ching, or Bhagavad Gita, or Gospel of John, or Seneca, that each person will bring in more and more. And it's going to surprise you. Please take the time to read the work and try to get as much as you can from it. And I promise you, no matter how much work you do, after the meetup, you will get more. Because I know no matter how hard I work, I get more after the meetups, because it's a question of multiple perspectives. What we are looking at is really core of what we are as human beings. We are incredibly complex, and there is a lot going on within us and between us, and we don't fully understand it. Art is a map of trying to get at that territory. And some of the maps are better than others, and some of them focus on different aspects of the territory, but they all kind of work together if you can make them work. So that is what I would like to do in this adventure. Okay, it's going to be an adventure, and I invite you to do that. So now, would like any comments on what I've said about the approach of accessing this? I deliberately wanted to start at the beginning, where we establish where we are to also talk about that it is well worth doing. Okay, that the object is worth it. We are starting with where each of us are about our understanding of art. And now we are going to use the medium of Aristotle's Poetics in order to take us where we are in the beginning towards the object, which is making art a greater part of our life, making our life more like art. So that's how I'm thinking of approaching it. Would love to hear your comments on that way of approaching Aristotle's Poetics. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. So the focus here is to say, your reaction. What is your reaction to this way of proceeding? We'll start with Jen. Jen, what do you think?
Yeah, I actually quite agree with what the art is, how we process life, because I'm a big movie fan. So I watch a lot of movies. I like award-winning movies. And what I found is so interesting. Usually the most interesting movie is actually from real story. So it's funny how our imagination is so limited. So what's actually real is always out of our expectation or imagination. So I think art is like, and my husband make comments. He said, "Oh, we live life, then watch other people how they live their life." So it's like, I think the reason people like to watch, because people try to process. They live their life. They try to figure out. When they watch the movie, and novelist or artist, they have some insight of the life, so they can see some pattern. They can see something. So when people watch it, oh, they can actually get some insight of what they experience. I think that's why we all love to, it's help us to understand ourselves better. It remind me, one of the most important book in my life actually is when I read, I think it's called Brown Adam by Jeff London, and it's about a sailor how become a writer. And when I read that book, there's so many words that like I try to mark every single word from that book. It's like, oh my God, it just exactly saying what I'm thinking. And the funny thing is, it gave me so much confidence, because at that time I couldn't find anybody in my class I can talk to. It seemed like people just on different wavelengths. They don't know, they can't understand me. And it make you self doubt. And when I read the book, I was like, my God, this book is last forever. These people are nothing. So so it's kind of like gave me kind of like understanding and confidence. I think that's the power of art, like make you understood, make yourself like believe in yourself, or find your true self and grow it in a way.
Thank you, Chen. Great point. So Aristotle talks about this in his Poetics. He says, when you look at most of the plays, many of them are based on historical facts. And they have taken the historical facts and they have embellished it. And they have kind of changed and morphed it. Because art is about what could be and should be. That could be part is important. It is something about reality. And it is projecting the ideal at the same time. So it is using reality as a base in order to project the ideal. So that's why, Aristotle thinks that base actually connects to your life far more, and people can say, oh, I could be there, and then shows characters acting, thinking, emoting in a way which is higher than what you see around you. So it is a question of taking that base and doing something with it. Next up is going to be Joe. So folks, so the question now on the table is, I've proposed a way of approaching Aristotle's Poetics. What do you think about it? And what is your reaction overall to this project of going through Poetics and focusing on the question of what is art, what does it do for us, and what is good art, and how do we build art into our lives? Joe.
I'm excited about this. I think it's actually going to be one of the more important works for me personally. You actually took the words right out of my mouth. One of the things that in listening to this that really struck me was the idea of how stories and poetics are universals and histories are particulars. And that was that really caught my ear when I was listening to it, because I thought to myself, we just went through this whole idea of history and how, how it's captured, how it needs to be captured, and how there are narratives integrated with that. But just thinking about it in those terms, what is an ideal? How to think outside, how to come, imagine things differently. The other is, I think that in understanding why certain characters connect to us is very important. That's something where Aristotle's very strong on the idea of character development. And so understanding that and why we connect with that character I think is going to be very insightful for us personally. And just honestly, what the structure that you went through, the 3-part structure, just understanding that and putting it together in a story. Many times, actually in consulting, they taught Aristotle's Poetics. They taught it because they said, this is what our ideas. This is kind of an ideal, but a client can envision where they're going. You're never going to tell them something that they already don't know. So you have to give them a vision of where they could go. And that's where you go from what is a particular, what is, to what could be. And learning to do that both within that, very meaningless context to our, our lives, actually, in a way. So, I mean, and so, yeah, I mean, even what makes a good theme, diction, all of the things that actually, I think that this is going to be a very fruitful journey. One of the most beneficial for me personally. So yeah. Anyway, I think and I like the approach. So
wonderful.
Yeah, and I also liked how he goes through we'll go through it, but the history aspect of just what Sophocles had brought to, how each writer, Homer, what they had brought to and changed, in that you can see the changes, and then you understand the difference in those poets. Then it's powerful. It's like you can keep going over and over it again. So anyway.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Julie. Julie, go ahead.
So if you gave me a topic, initially I would probably not see much, like when I got on this call. It's like, well, what can you say about art? I mean, I'm a different person now after being on this call. So if you gave me a writing assignment, I would probably be blank at first. I would go out running with my music that night. I would start to get my own ideas, and I would come back and finish the paper. And on the other side of the paper, I'm a different person than I was when I started it. And then if somebody else shared their papers with me, after I've exhausted everything in myself, I suddenly get icing on the cake by hearing all these other perspectives I never had thought of. And to me, what your idea is, doing all that magic, you taking Aristotle's thing and then applying all the magic that we can to it. And if we do our homework, we're going to appreciate it all too, all the more. So I think it's powerful.
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly what I'm proposing to do, of actually applying, keep on applying the ideas that we are learning. Because these ideas are about just us living. This is the art of living, really.
I have one last point that I wanted to say. Art, for me, when I write, if you don't like what I write, it doesn't really matter. It's because it's a pure expression and there's no agenda really when I write. And that keeps it more honest and authentic. And when you were talking about doing something for the bigger cause, the corporation or whatever, what comes to mind is that quote that says, "Imagine how much we could get done if nobody cared who got the credit."
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Next up is going to be Paul, followed by DLJ. Paul.
Yeah, I feel a mixture of cautionary tale and enthusiasm, but mostly I understand the cautionary tale so that I can have the enthusiasm and proceed. But the cautionary tale is, in my mind, like, well, Homer, when he wrote the Iliad, he didn't have a single concept that Aristotle was talking about in his head. And if you try to write from an aesthetic philosophical orientation, your ability to be the channel that I talked about disappears. And you're writing from your brain. You're writing from, first I'm going to have this plot twist, then I'm going to reverse it, then I'm going to ask this character to say X, because that's poetically sound. And then you cannot write to save your life. So that's my cautionary tale. But on the second point is, I'm very curious about what survives and what is no longer relevant in what he wrote from a point of view of human consciousness. Like, what is the universal thing that he got at versus Greek language syllables? I mean, it's interesting to parse that out for me, and it helps to think about, because although I like this sort of non-thinking process when I'm creating, I do then go through, like we do in our Monday nights, exactly the same way, an iteration that involves cognition, looking at what I created and having a thought process that says, oh, here's Aristotle's model of how a plot flows. Will not be bad to have in my information field. So I look at it, all those ideas are in my head about this, mostly enthusiastic.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I mean, it is a dilemma for most artists. Okay, so this thing that you're talking about, cautionary and enthusiasm, is there for most artists. And the best solution I've actually heard is from my friend Rob Krasinski. And he's saying you just have to accept that there are two faculties that you have, which are very different from each other. You have the automatic faculties, which are creative faculties, which are flowing, which have a flowing nature that comes from the deep layers that you have put in your brain. That's one kind of faculty. The second kind of faculty you have is analytical faculty. And both these faculties, actually, you cannot use them together at the same time. If you accept that, then you can actually make them work well. So, and what you produce as a result of that is so much better. It has a plot structure that actually captivates people. At the same time, the rich flowing movement that keeps them completely engaged and moving along. But for that, you have to have the ability, not just, it's a skill. And there is a meetup that he's done, which is very beautiful on this topic. If you search on 52 Living Ideas, I think it's called Shuttling Between the creative, so he calls it creative and analytical faculties. Because as a writer, he does that all the time. He can produce amazing amount of writing in a short period of time. And he does that using this. He's been doing that for like 20 years. And I personally find it very, very useful because what it does is that you have to accept the fact that you have these two faculties and not let one get in the way of the other. The problem happens when one gets when you should be creating, you're trying to analyze and critique what you're doing. It will stop you. Or when you're trying to analyze, try to create at the same time. The analysis is going to be really bad. Okay, so you kind of have to give, and it's done very simply by just giving a distance from yourself. Understand that what you're producing is something out there. You do a pass on it through one of the faculties. Keep it aside, maybe sleep on it, and come the next day and look at it as if somebody else did it, and take it forward through analysis. For example, if you have done the creative pass, or if you have done the analysis the previous day or in previous cycle, just take the results of the analysis and let it flow. Don't worry about it changing things at that point. Let it just go. And then you will come back and do an editing pass to kind of build. So there is a way of doing that to deal with this one. And that's the best solution that I've seen for it. But Paul, thank you for raising the concerns as well as that, because if you think that you can deductively, if anybody thinks that they can deductively read something and produce art, doesn't work that way at all. Doesn't work that way at all. So great point. Thank you. Next up is DLJ, followed by Mona. DLJ.
Yeah, so you asked for comments on the approach. I bet you can predict what I'm going to say, right? I'm going to be predictable here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're choosing the, as you did with the Tao and so on, what I call the fan club or the Bible study approach. So it's like, how does it make us feel? What can it do for us? What does it do for us? That kind of thing, which is okay. All right. But you know where I'm heading with this one, right? Because I want to ask the question, is it right? Is it true? Is it valid? So more of a critique kind of approach. So as long as I get to ask that question, I'm good.
Sure. I mean, the thing is that we use, these scribal methods, which are the methods that, Tao Te Ching or Bhagavad Gita or the Gospel of John or Aristotle or Seneca are using in a very deep way, and which is very different than the analytical method that is used in modern times. And there's always a conflict between that. We are completely in this, 52 Living Ideas, we're just committed to that method, and it produces the kind of conversation that we did now. So you have to judge whether it is worth it or not. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you're here. And I'm glad that by just being here, you're voting for the the worth of this approach. And you're of course welcome to make any comments that you wish. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mona, followed by Jen. Mona.
Yes, I want to build up on what Paul mentioned about what does it mean to create art with sort of analytic versus like intuitive. I don't know how to say it, the creative process. And I'm reminded about what they tell students at art school. Like they learn the craft. They learn the craft. You need to learn the craft. You need to learn the techniques. But then once they're sent out the door, they say, now you forget all about it. So you've learned it, you kind of integrate it, and then you kind of don't think about it and make it your own, like make your own thing. And I think that kind of addresses Paul's concern. Yeah, I mean, another example that Evanique was talking about is, or what I was talking about in response to Evanique was about the method acting. This is, what's his name? Forget his name. There is a gentleman who does this, Meissner method, which is basically about just taking in, it's like you master the actual lines, the actual plot, actual characters. You just have to get that in, and that's there as a part of you. And then you forget it in the sense that you are actually implementing it, but then you're actually focused on the characters and interaction between, and that creates this living characters which embody those lines and that situation. It is slightly different every time, but it has this authenticity with it. Thank you.
Zheng.
Yeah, so I remember I read somewhere the highest level of anything we do is art or philosophy. So I think we talk a lot about philosophy. It's a good time we add into the art. And I really like what you're talking about this ideal image, because I think that's actually my challenge, because I actually read a lot of novels when I grow up, and I think I believe they're all true. So unfortunately, the older I get, I realize even since the Tao, everybody taught us don't care about money, don't care about the fame, but it's still the same after thousands of years. Why we're still talking about the exact same thing? Why it's so hard to do? And I think, and I actually think, and you just mentioned that really inspired me. I think the key is how we keep idealistic in reality. So, like, actually, my father was research on this flight machine, and I think it reminded me about this movie, this novel about what is his name? The guy was fighting the imaginary horse. Like everybody
Don
is a
Quixote, yeah.
donkey, yeah. And it's such a great novel because it summarizes so many people. Because in our mind, we are heroes in some way. We will never fulfill the hero's journey, and then we create this imaginary hero's journey. So it's very sad, you know. Like I try to talk to the manufacturer, make it happen. Then I realize it doesn't work. He may not even want it to happen. He's already 80 years old. But anyway, so I think then I recently listened to this talk about Su Dongpo is a poet in China. Is so inspiring because he is kind of like combination of this practical and idealistic. I think that's the key, you know, because it's so easy to be either practical or idealistic. It's very hard. You can be practical at the same time. You can have this idealistic view to make it better. And I think they mentioned about Sun was is a poet and he was managing the country, and then he was in the old very quickly. I think the story will benefit many people. When when he was actually lost his the emperor sent him to a remote area, and he actually the time he write best poem in his life. That's right, he write a poem, and this son remote area, and he's writing this poem. If you eat this li zhi 300 a day, you will always stay here. And people said he enjoys such a great life. We should send him more miserable place. So they keep sending him more miserable place. But wherever he go, he teach people. You know, he help them build the road. He's such a great example of how people, wherever they are, they make it ideal, you know, in whatever condition. I think that's art of living. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Zheng. That's actually a very fundamental point, and that's actually the reason why I have chosen Aristotle's Poetics, because if you look at what is common to Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John, I will express it in form of Gospel of John because that's what everybody is more familiar with. It is the idea of theosis. It is the idea of incarnation. It is the idea of being 100% God and 100% man. It is the idea of bringing the universal in the particular. That's what art is at its highest. It is about bringing heaven to earth. It is basically the God within you. It is, you know, this is, you know, Gita talks about as being God within you. You know, God within you greets the God, you know, in the others. It is the unity of Atma and Brahma. It is the idea of moving. It is idea of true vine, you know, which is moving, which is going with natural things and producing fruits. It is, you know, it is the Tao. It is saying flow like water, you know, be like water, my friend. You know, Bruce Lee talking about that. It's the same. All of this is the same thing. It is about the highest ideal being manifested in concrete reality in life. It is the idea of living ideas, you know. It is the idea where the idea actually begins to live. It is like God, word made flesh. It is that these are all various things. The way in which Aristotle puts it is what can be and should be. So can be is the foundation of it. It can exist in reality and should be. So it is moral and it is real. It is ideal and it is real at the same time. So, Jen, thank you for capturing that. I think that's what we are doing, and that's why I think this is going to be a great series of meetups. I'm honored to have all you folks here. I was just completely blown away by all the observations, everything, and I'm thankful to Evanique for being like the backup moderator for these series. I want to be here almost every time, but if I have to step away for a few minutes, Evanique is going to step up and handle everything. So again, thank you for that. And thank you for everybody. It's like, each and every one of you had such incredible observations that and I strongly recommend, please read, the thing is, translation is a very big deal. So there are many translations available for free, go through that. There are many things, many versions available on YouTube. I've just put one version that's not necessarily the best, but go through all the YouTube versions. If you prefer listening, or go through all the, search for PDFs, you will find many, many, many PDFs on this. Choose ones that you like. And what I will do is that I will try to break it up into several sections, and we'll start slow with like 1 or 2 sections in the beginning. It's going to be very few pages, like maybe 10 pages or something like that. So we can go through and discuss it in great amount of detail. All right. Again, honored to have all of you folks participating. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. Good night.